In the last hour, the US president's been speaking at the White House shortly after a phone call with Israeli President Benjamin Netanyahu.
And let there be no doubt, the United States has Israel's back. We will make sure the Jewish and democratic state of Israel can defend itself today, tomorrow, as we always have. It's as simple as that. These atrocities have been sickening. We're with Israel. Let's make no mistake. Thank you.
Mr. President, what was your...
Airstrikes have continued today, focused on southern Israel. So Keir Starmer's promising to build the next generation of new towns if Labour wins the next election. The party leader's been addressing the conference in Liverpool today. 3 people are in a critical condition after a small plane crashed at an airfield. It happened at Langham Airfield in North Norfolk shortly after 3:30 this afternoon. And the UK and Ireland says the Euros in 2028 will be an outstanding summer of football after being announced as hosts. The final's likely to be at Wembley Stadium. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 141 points at 76.34. The pound buys $1.22 and €1.15. LBC weather: blustery showers in the north tonight, heavy rain in the south with a low of 3. Rain spreading across central England and Wales tomorrow, brighter in northern parts with a high of 21 Celsius. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Charlotte Morgan.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's coming up to 2 minutes past 8 on LBC. It's Tuesday's Cross Question here at the Labour Party conference in Liverpool. With us on the panel today, we have Nick Thomas-Symonds, Shadow Minister without portfolio, which means he can say anything he likes, so that's good. And we will have, after 8:30, Owen Jones will be joining us, the Guardian columnist. Luciana Berger is here, former Labour MP. Calgie is here, also senior political correspondent at the Daily Express. 0345 6060 973 if you'd like to put a call into our panel, and you can text 84850, send a message via Alexa, just say send a comment to LBC, and do watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Welcome to you all. Before we start, let's just sort of ask you for your best conference experience so far over the last 3 days. If you've got one, you might not have one, Nick.
Unquestionably, Keir.
I knew you were going to say that.
Unquestionably, Iain.
The ultra-loyalist. Christian.
On a personal basis, the weather has obviously been incomparable to Tory conference, and that has really lightened the mood over the last 3 days.
It's blowy today.
That along with the 20-point Labour lead, which I'm sure contributes to the atmosphere.
Luciana.
I also would have said Keir's speech. I will also reflect on, I had my first experience back here at party conference, my first official day here on Sunday, and I spoke at a rally, and everyone was incredibly generous and kind with their response.
Because we should explain that a few years ago you were here and you had to have personal security, I believe.
Yeah, this conference is incomparable to my last party conference experience 5 years ago.
I must say, when I've seen you around the place, you look incredibly cheerful, which I suspect was not the look on your face the last time. Right, let's go to a caller. It's Hannah in Coventry. Hannah, very good evening. What would you like to ask?
Yes, hiya. I've just got a question for the panel. Should international aid be allowed to pass into Gaza, considering reports in Israeli media have suggested that Israel will bomb aid convoys from Egypt?
Now, the United Nations has estimated that around 80% of the population of Gaza depend on international aid to survive. So just to put that into context. Nick Thomas-Symonds.
I think there is a distinction between Hamas and aid to assist, say, Palestinian children. I think it's important to make that. But let's not beat around the bush with this. What Hamas have done, they're a terrorist organisation, and what they've done is truly appalling. They should be condemned unequivocally for it, and I think what they have done has also pushed back the cause of peace in Palestine and in the Middle East. And of course Israel has the right to defend itself, of course proportionally and in line with international law, and I think that's what we're seeing.
Luciana.
I hadn't heard that report, and obviously there's two borders into Gaza. There's the border on the Israeli side, there's the border on the Egyptian side. There's also tunnels that go into Gaza as well. And aid should be reaching the innocent people in Gaza.
But the Israelis have essentially said they're not going to allow energy, electricity, food or water into Gaza. So if they won't allow that, and if they stop any aid convoys going into Gaza, now we had Zippy Hotovali on a moment ago essentially saying, well, they can go through Egypt then. But Egypt doesn't seem to be very minded to open up that side of the Gaza border either.
Yeah, we are in a war situation at this time. As you've just heard from Nick, it's in response to horror that is unimaginable. Looking at just some of the images and videos that have come from Israel that's seen over 1,000 people murdered since Saturday, we're in a situation where Israel is having to defend itself, and these situations present very, very, very difficult circumstances. I was in the region just a couple of months ago. I was there in July. I was on the Gaza border, just a quarter of a mile away, in a community called Kfar Sabah. It's a kibbutz. It's not a very wealthy community. There are reports coming from there that still the IDF are having to deal with booby traps, and dozens of people have been murdered. And I don't know if the people that I met just a couple of months ago that I ate in their communal dining room, whose homes I went to, whose shops, their kibbutz shop I shopped in, I don't know who of those people that I met, if they're alive. And I have to ask myself, what would any government do in that situation? Governments have a duty to protect their citizens and to contend with what are unimaginable atrocities.
Christian.
Well, you raised an important point, which is why wouldn't Egypt allow aid in, right? If they're making the same considerations on security, if things are going in, possibly things can come out. There have also been historic concerns, I know, because I also visited Israel. I visited possibly the same kibbutz a couple of months ago, and spoke to many people about to what extent does aid, once it's entered Gaza, reach the people it's intended to, or to what extent does the Hamas government repatriate those supplies for their own means? And that's also a very legitimate question to be asking. Obviously, on each case-by-case basis, whether it's water, food, aid, it will have to be judged on a case-by-case basis. But at the moment, I'm willing to let Israeli intelligence make those calls, and I'm not one to question them.
Well, they've done so well, haven't they, Israeli intelligence, in predicting this? I mean, clearly something went very, very wrong there, because no one. Well, but then again, our intelligence service, you might have thought, might have picked something up, or the Americans, but they didn't. Interesting text here from Jim, who says, does the panel think that Joe Biden referring to Israel as Jewish Israel helps or hinders the situation in cosmopolitan Israel today? Because I think this is quite an important point, isn't it? You I don't know if you've ever been to Israel, Nick, but you two have. And when you go to Israel, it's not this sort of monotone state. It's a vibrant mixed culture with how many there was 9 million people, I think, in Israel, and 1 million of them are Arabs who live perfectly happily side by side, integrated. But I wonder whether that intervention from Joe Biden is actually very helpful.
I mean, as I understand, he's calling the country what it is. It's an Israeli. Israel is a Jewish state.
But it's more than that, isn't it? And that's not to dismiss it being a Jew. I mean, most of the people are Jewish.
But being Jewish means so many different things to so many people, even more so within the Jewish community. I mean, you ask anyone that's Jewish, what does it mean to be Jewish? And it means a plethora of things, and that is borne out within Israeli society. It's a majority Jewish state, but yes, Israel is home to many other minority communities, including Israeli Arabs, including the Bedouin community, and it's also one of the only safe havens in the Middle East for people from the LGBTQIA plus community. It's very multicultural, it's very cosmopolitan, as you rightly say. I mean, Tel Aviv if anyone's had the opportunity to go there, well, the city on the beach is incredibly vibrant and pluralist, and there's many different aspects that make up Jewish, both the Jewish community within Israel, but the wider Israeli society. But absolutely, it's still a majority Jewish state.
There are 60,000 Brits in Israel. Do you think the government should be making contingency plans to evacuate them? Because this could get a hell of a lot worse in the immediate future, Nick.
Well, firstly, I've not been to Israel, Ian, but I've just come from a dinner with someone, a friend who visited a kibbutz, and they were very recently close to the Gaza border, and there are now appalling reports of babies having been killed, of houses being destroyed.
Not just killed, beheaded. I've just on my Twitter feed, I've just tweeted a French journalist who, also they don't show it, but they've got 100% cast iron evidence of babies being beheaded.
It's unspeakable, absolutely unspeakable what is happening. Look, the Foreign Office operates a system where they take particular judgments, whether it's in this particular situation in Israel or indeed in other countries when they think it's appropriate to do things like that. But I think at the moment, I think watching this, it's just the horror of it really is just overwhelming to look at.
Christian?
I think that we should be proceeding along the view that things will get possibly worse. I don't think we should be complacent, and I think there's a lot of potential here. Iran has made some very worrying statements, and obviously there's also threats and warnings coming from the West Bank as well, and if there's a pincer movement of that sort, then we will absolutely have to act very, very quickly.
And especially if Hezbollah in the north from Lebanon sort of decide that they're going to open a different front.
They have already.
They have
already. And I know that there's people, British people, that want to get out of Israel. Currently they can get flights out, but they're going to Germany because there aren't any currently direct flights to London. And I hope that there's flights that continue to operate so that they can get out of the country.
Well, here's another interesting one from Mike in Dollis Hill. Does the panel have a view on why the BBC won't call Hamas terrorists? The Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, confronted BBC Breakfast host Sally Nugent about this during an interview this morning. BBC guidelines advises journalists to use words other than terrorist without attribution. I think this is outrageous. I'm going to offer a personal opinion here. Why don't we call them what they are? They are terrorists. Yes, they are militants as well, but somehow militant isn't quite as sort of bad a word as terrorist. Christian?
Yes, the BBC use the word terrorist for many other instances and many other organisations. They seem to be particularly squeamish over this, and it's completely disgraceful. And once again, I won't bring in other grievances, but I do worry that over the last few years, because of various cuts and things, the BBC's news output and editorial judgments is becoming increasingly poor, and this is just the latest straw on the camel's back. They have to update this guidance, and they have to change the language now, because to go on any longer they will lose so much respect out there.
Mike, I've got to apologise to you because you're a caller, not a texter. I thought it was a text. Apologies for that, Nick.
I'm very confused by the guidance here, because Hamas are terrorists, but not only that, they are a prescribed organisation. It is a formal legal position that is what they are, and it's slightly confusing to me as to why the guidance is as it is when that is the crystal clear legal position.
Luciana?
Well, what you're hearing here and what you've heard from government representatives as well, I think is quite a unified position that in this instance the BBC is wrong, and these clearly are terrorists perpetrating these brutal, absolutely horrific attacks, and we should call them out for what they are. And we've heard also from the Foreign Secretary, who's been asked about this as well, that he also believes that we should call Hamas what it is. Let's be very clear, this is an organisation that was created in 1988 with the key aim and objective of obliterating Israel, of destroying Israel. And that is what they've sought to do over this weekend, and in their attacks that they've perpetrated over an extended number of decades. So I have no idea why the BBC continues to call them anything other than terrorists. I understand these are guidelines that have been in existence for an extended period of time, and it was interesting to read the former head of television for the BBC, Danny Cohen, call it out and say that really at this time we have we should be seeing the BBC change its guidelines. And I think, having seen this response, I hope that they now act.
It'll have to go through 5 or 6 committees, I imagine, and take about 12 years. Text question from Sarah in Edinburgh. How does the panel feel about Suella Braverman's decision to ban the Palestinian flag? Is it not an attack on free speech? I have to say this is a new one on me. But the Home Secretary has apparently written to police chief constables across England and Wales regarding the threat of Jewish people in Britain facing harassment and intimidation because of events in Israel. And she's told them that behaviours, this is a quote, behaviours that are legitimate in some circumstances, for example the waving of a Palestinian flag, may not be legitimate, such as when intended to glorify acts of terrorism. That's quite something, isn't it, Nick?
Well, I think that, first of all, look, there's a distinction between the Palestinian flag and the Hamas flag. The Hamas flag is banned, right? It is banned. It would be an offence to hold it. Now, you've only just read that to me, so I can't obviously understand the context is being said, but if the flag were being used deliberately as part of an attempt to cause harassment, alarm or distress to a particular Jewish community, then that would be a criminal offence as well. I think that's what the Home Secretary seems to be referring to there, and I do think that is important.
Luciana?
Well, there's a distinction between waving a flag and the scenes that we've seen of video footage of people on the streets of London taking those flags and seemingly having a party or celebration in response to the atrocities that we are seeing unfold in Israel.
But there was a demonstration here on Sunday, because I walked past it, and there were lots of people carrying Free Palestine flag with the Palestinian flag as the main part of it. And I mean, I can't really think that should be outlawed, should it?
It's provocative, but I think it's the behaviours that accompany it. I think just standing with a flag, to me, doesn't feel right. But separately, we have in this country a number of pieces of legislation, be that the Public Order Act, we've got laws around racial incitement, we've got very robust legislation to prevent the glorification of terrorism. If it's clear that people have breached any one of those three, or collectively any of those three pieces of legislation, we should be taking action. And I hope that the police will be taking a zero tolerance approach to anything further that we might see unfold. And I say that we might see unfold, it's heartbreaking to see any of the events that we've seen on our streets in the UK that have occurred already. I understand already we've got 3 times increase in the number of levels of anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic incidents and just in the last few days alone. And I think it's incumbent on everyone to come together to say we don't accept this on our streets.
Christian?
Obviously, the events in the region are the most heartbreaking and devastating things, but I have been incredibly worried by what's been going on our streets over here, and I think the police have once again been woefully inadequate in policing this. I mean, you said that there were people stood outside Labour conference just holding Palestinian flags. I mean, there was a Jewish conference goer who was being yelled at by about 20 pro-Palestinian people to clear off and get out of here, and it was horrifying. And then down in London, obviously, again, we've seen rallies, I've seen speeches of people glorifying Hamas, and the police have been stood around like they're at a county fair, not making arrests. The legislation, as ever, the legislation is there, and there seems to be a complete failure for the police to understand what the legislation is and then go in and enforce it. And I'll give the benefit of the doubt, presume that Suella Braverman is specifically talking about these incidents and saying that once there's been a killing on this level, you cannot go out and parade the flag of the country that is behind the atrocities.
Well, it's not often Suella Braverman gets the benefit of the doubt on this programme, but we'll allow that one through just once. Now, you've done so brilliantly. We've never had, I think in the first quarter of the programme, we've never answered 4 questions, so you've done brilliantly so far. So we're going to move on from Israel, if you'd like to ask some questions on a different subject. But you can have your say on what's happening in Israel and Gaza after 9 for the whole hour. 0345 6060 973. It's 90 minutes past 8.
LBC
syllabus test.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
21 minutes past 8, we have with us on Cross Question Christian Calgie, senior political reporter, or correspondent, sorry. I nearly demoted you. You can't be a senior... Well, you can be senior reporter, I suppose, but you are senior political correspondent with the Daily Express. Luciana Berger is former Labour MP. Nick Thomas-Symonds is shadow minister without portfolio. What does that actually mean? And what do you do all day?
Well, I asked a previous holder of the role of shadow minister without portfolio how they interpret it, and I was told the way to interpret it is shadow minister of all portfolios.
That's quite powerful. So
Your colleagues will be delighted with that.
does that mean you basically get on the media a lot more than anybody else? You're sort of minister for you're the minister for lightning rods.
No, I mean my central role is about preparing for government, and I have a range of responsibilities from public inquiries to constitutional reform across actually to relations with the EU. So I've ended up with quite a wide portfolio.
I should try and ditch that one if I were you. And we have Luciana Berger as well. Owen Jones will be joining us after 8:30. 0345 6060 973 if you'd like to put a question through to our panel. Now, a text question here, and it really is a text question this time from Daniel in Fareham. Are Labour trying to win an election without any policies? Bit cutting, isn't it, Nick?
We're certainly not trying to do that, and I thought that in Keir's excellent speech today, you heard a number of things that he was putting forward. Firstly, the house building, the 1.5 million houses over the course of a parliament, the National Wealth Fund, bringing in that private sector investment. He was talking about GB Energy. He was talking about technical colleges of excellence in vocational qualifications, which he feels very personally because of his father, who he felt had those kind of qualifications but was always looked down upon because of it. So I think you saw a variety of things in Keir's speech, but what a powerful address it was, particularly given the way that the speech began. And I think people often ask about seeing the real Keir Starmer. Well, I thought you saw the real Keir Starmer at the start of that speech when he brushed it off and got on with the task in hand.
Were you on the stage at the time?
I was sat at the front with the rest of the shadow cabinet.
Bird's eye view of what was going on, because I mean I wouldn't expect to be in the front row.
Matter of time, Ian.
I was quite a way back, but even from my distance, you could tell that there was something weird going on. But what did you think was happening?
Well, first of all, it's the slight shock as to what is going on, and the angle I was looking at, because as you look at the stage, I was on the right-hand side, and all I could see initially was an arm on Keir's shoulder, which I just thought looked a bit odd. But then gradually, when the person was carried out horizontally in front of me, you realise then what's actually happened. But I thought Keir's response when he straight away said, look, we've become a party of power, not of protest, and even remembered to say, well, I'm covered in glitter, but at least it's not Vic, because it would have wrecked the red dress.
Yeah, and I think he dealt with it brilliantly, but it could have been so much worse, couldn't it? That's the issue, and I think everyone needs to think about that, particularly whoever's responsible. I don't know whether it is a shadow minister without portfolio responsibility for conference security, but deputy heads must roll.
Well, I think we've had this before. I think remember it was a Theresa May conference, I think, where she was handed something on the stage, and I think obviously we're going to have to look at that. There's no doubt about that. But at the same time, you authentically saw him react to something that he clearly hadn't expected to happen, and I thought he did it very well.
Luciana?
Well, in response to the incident, I saw it from the far side, so it was very unclear to us what was exactly going on. But in terms of Keir's response, I mean, he brushed it off. He was unrattled. He rolled his sleeves up, quite literally, and he got on with it, and he gave the speech of his life. And I'm only sorry that we're talking about that incident rather than the substance of what he said. And in response to the question that you posed at the start of the segment, I think it was policy rich. I thought it was setting out the vision for how we provide people of this country with hope, and how we can create a country that actually gets things moving, and not only builds the houses that Nick referred to, 1.5 million in 5 years, which we desperately need to allow people to actually own the homes that they aspire to, but to make sure we're giving young people aspiration and hope for the future.
There's quite a lot, and I mean, Rishi Sunak would obviously appreciate this sort of long-term stuff there. What was their phrase? Long-term decisions for a brighter future. But if you are somebody who's literally struggling to put food on the table today, what was there for somebody like that? There were very few, I thought, policies for sort of more short-term things, sort of trying to solve the crisis in the NHS in terms of waiting lists. I mean, we've heard about the non-dom thing paying for that yet again. It's obviously going to pay for a huge number of things. But there wasn't much about improving people's lives who are really struggling at the moment, I didn't think.
Well, hang on. We've heard in recent days about dentistry, and we've got dental deserts in the UK. We've heard a specific pledge about dental appointments. We've heard a specific pledge about bringing down NHS waiting lists. And in direct answer to your question about the impact now, I'm sure someone, or one of the 7 million people on a waiting list, it would make a massive difference to their daily life if they came off that waiting list with the overtime that we're suggesting we're going to pay for.
But they can legitimately say, you say you're going to use the non-dom money for that, but you've already spent that on recruiting more doctors and nurses.
The figures do add up on the non-dom status, and also, when we promise things, we actually say how we'll pay for them. Similarly, on the closing the VAT loophole on private schools, that's what we use in terms of the mental health treatment and indeed the additional teachers in the state sector. So when we make the pledges, Ian, we do say where the money's coming from.
Christian.
What I would firstly say is that I don't really think a party conference keynote speech by the leader is the place to announce a full manifesto a year off from an election. I also think that not only did Keir Starmer deal with the protester as well as I can imagine any human being dealing with such a situation, but most people don't care about party leader conference speeches, and that's the sort of thing that they'll see on the news and they'll think, do you know what, actually that was quite level-headed and I'm quite impressed, and
Well, I agree that most people don't follow party conferences like we all do, but the one bit of the party conference that they do see on the news bulletins is the leader's speech. I mean, they'll all be playing a couple of minutes of it. And I just wonder, if you are somebody on the verge of voting Labour, you're thinking about it, but you haven't quite sort of tipped over the edge yet, if there was really enough in that speech to tip many people over the edge.
No, I don't think so. I think there's a bit more meat on the bones. Some of it looks like that sort of razor-thin ham you get in supermarkets. Some of it's a bit... I don't know what that metaphor is. But I think the main point to say that the big announcement today was housing. I am a vociferous YIMBY and in favour of building houses, and even I will concede that Labour is proposing a much better offering on housing than the Tories. I don't think it meets the definition of planning reform. I think there's a lot of reforms within the existing planning system which they may exercise rather well to improve house building. But in terms of a top-to-toe reforming, abolishing of the Town and Country Planning Act, that sort of level of planning reform, we didn't get that. But again, there's a long time, it's probably a full year until the election. It would be foolish if I were in their space to start reeling off fiscal policy announcements at this point. But when are they going
to do it, Luciana? If they don't do it now, a year out from an election, I mean, you can't put it all in the 2 weeks before the election campaign starts.
No, you can't do the last 2 weeks, but certainly we're looking at 13 months ahead of us, and certainly the indications are we're looking at an election probably next November, possibly October, but not really before.
First week of December, that's my bet.
Well, it'll probably be after this next conference, right? They'll rally then and then.
And yes, and people are hedging their bets. We may or may not see another party conference. But what I thought was really important in the speech was for Keir to set out his stall in the wake of him proving that he can change a party, which is what he's done, in order to now take it to the country and change the country. And clearly he, the one thing I think that Rishi Sunak got right last week was when he said that we need change in this country. Yes, we do. We need change from this current government and 5 prime ministers and 7 chancellors who, have taken this country to a financial crisis, a cost of living crisis that people are contending with every single day. What I think it was really important for Keir to do was, in the wake of the job that he's done to turn this party around, was to set out his stall about his ideology, about changing politics, talking about integrity and not having that sticking plaster politics. And what really sums up in some ways his speeches is that we're not going to see this short-termism, this flip-flopping, which has caused such consternation. I mean, we sit here today in the Northwest and everything that's happened, we haven't touched on HS2, but that has caused so much distress. This this is going to be a government, if Labour is successful, and they've got a massive, the party's got a massive challenge to win that election, because it requires more of a swing than the party achieved in 1997. But if it does so, it's going to be a very, very different type of politics.
We're going to say goodbye to you now, Luciana.
Thank you.
But you're going to be replaced, if that is possible, by Owen Jones. He's going to be joining us in a couple of minutes. I actually want to hear Owen Jones's response to Daniel's question. Are Labour trying to win an election without any policies? I think he might have a possibly different answer, but we will soon see. It's 8:32. Keep your calls coming. 0345 6060 973. News headlines now with Charlotte Morgan.
Joe Biden says Israel has a right to retaliate for attacks by Hamas. The US president's calling it an act of sheer evil. So Keir Starmer says Labour would bulldoze through any restrictions to build a new Britain if the party wins the next election. A man's been arrested after the start of his party conference speech was interrupted by a protester. And 3 people are in a critical condition after a small plane crashed at an airfield in North Norfolk. It happened at Langham shortly after 3:30 this afternoon. LBC weather: blustery showers in the north tonight, heavy rain in the south with a low of 3.
LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
8:35 on LBC. You're listening to LBC's Cross Question. Owen Jones has joined us, Guardian columnist, YouTuber.
Yeah.
Is that your latest big thing? Your
Yes,
YouTube?
I do use YouTube. I'm not offended by being called a YouTuber as well.
I watched your documentary from the Tory Party conference in which I featured.
You did, because Eric Pickles, I actually felt sorry for Eric Pickles, which is a first. Eric Pickles, we had a little ding-dong, talked about the Rwanda scheme, and his understanding of the Rwanda scheme is that migrants and refugees get sent to Rwanda, processed, and if they're approved, they get to come back to Britain. And I said that was absolutely not the case, but he doubled down. But what was he went off, and then he came back to say, I've looked at the scheme, that's definitely what happened. And I said, it really isn't. They stay in Rwanda if they're accepted. And I cited you, because you did a really good clip, I thought. It was your characteristic honesty, if I'm going to flatter you, butter you up before we have ding dong. No, but you said that you were just really shocked. You were genuinely shocked when you found that what the scheme means is, regardless of circumstances, if they've been raped, if they've been tortured, if they've been attacked, if their fellow relatives have been killed, they stay in Rwanda. that's what happens. And he didn't understand or know that. Anyway, that's what happened.
It was quite an excruciating video in some ways, because some of the Conservatives you interviewed, and I don't know whether this was deliberate or not, but shall we put it this way, they didn't show the Conservative Party in its best light.
Do you know what? If I'm going to be honest, what we do is we always have a really good cross-section, young to old. I think we had a really good balance of people who were quite very critical of the Tories in their current incarnation, and those who I'd say are definitely on the hard right of that. But we interviewed young people who were very disillusioned actually with the rightward drift. I do personally, I think given how much the Tories have veered to the right, I don't know why, if you object to, for example, the rhetoric on migrants comparing human beings to a hurricane, a natural disaster which kills people, where you'd stay. But we did. No, we had a range of people should look it up. Honestly, we do vox pops. Basically, do vox pops.
It is worth a look. Now, Owen, I want you to answer the question which the other two have already answered from Daniel in Fareham. Are Labour trying to win an election without any policies?
I wouldn't go that far. I don't think the policies are meeting the challenge of what the state the country's in. I mean, where I agree with Keir Starmer's speech is he says that Labour in 1945 had to rebuild the country after collective sacrifice, 74 modernise the economy, 997 rebuild the public realm, but then 64. I do apologise.
Yeah,
that was another election, but not, you're quite right. He meant the white heat of technology under Harold Wilson. And 97 rebuild the public realm, and he said this time we have to do all three. But 1945 alone, the country was in a state. It'd been bombed by the Nazis, economically far more ruined than we are today. And they built the welfare state, the National Health Service, nationalised huge swathes of industry. And when Keir Starmer stood in the leadership election, he pledged to bring energy, water, and rail into public ownership, to increase taxes on the rich for investment, to abolish tuition fees. We could go on really. The policies that are there, which, if I'm going to be positive, there's still a good package on workers' rights. Relatively, it's been a bit diluted, but that would allow trade unions to organise workers to have more security in the workplace. Building housing, very good. Big housing crisis. House building under both New Labour and the Tories was bad. The GB Energy, publicly owned energy company. The problem is, they've said they won't increase taxes on well-off people who are doing very well. They don't have room for manoeuvre then, other than just betting the house on growth to invest in a country which is falling apart. Literally, if you look at schools, infrastructure, public services. And my worry is they'll raise expectations because people are relieved to get rid of the Tories, but they won't invest in the services, the infrastructure that we need, and they won't, deal properly with things like the housing crisis because they won't build council housing, things like that.
Nick Thomas-Symonds, just respond to it. I detect Owen slightly warming to the Starmer project. Just slightly. Only a couple of degrees.
Let's definitely not overdo that one.
But he's got a point, hasn't he, on all these flip-flops that Keir Starmer's done since he was elected leader.
No, the world is as it is, not how we wish it was, and we know that we are going to have that quite shocking inheritance, which I thought Keir drew on Attlee and Wilson very well, actually. I thought in terms of that particular section of his. Well, there is a quote from him on the front of the said books, Iain, if you wish to pick them up from the conference bookshop. But I thought that actually it was a speech of real ambition. 1.5 million homes over the course of a parliament is a transformational number. And if you can...
But he told Victoria Derbyshire on Sunday, I'm not going to have arbitrary targets, and then comes up with this one.
Well, I think, it's not arbitrary, it's chosen as something that he feels will meet the need. But the point around that is, look at the contrast with Rishi Sunak, who apparently agrees that we need houses, as I understand it, that's his position, but can't deliver them because he hasn't got the strength over his backbenchers, who are essentially in the NIMBY position that Christian has referred to, who've essentially defeated him on having any kind of mandatory targets. That's why Keir Starmer is able to say today, Labour is the party of home ownership.
Can I take on something you just said? Because I know the argument you're making. The reason he's reneged on all his pledges was because the world has changed and things have to move on. But if you take, for example, nationalisation, in an interview with Andrew Neil, he stood for the leadership and he said, nationalisation of energy, water, rail, all of them will be in the next manifesto. That was a pledge. After he was elected, he was interviewed by Lord Kunisberg and he said he'd never, ever committed to nationalisation. that's a lie. I mean, and it's important to talk about lies in politics because it corrupts democracy. And the thing about lies in politics is a fish rots from the head down, because what happens is he's dishonest and then you have to be dishonest as well to defend his dishonesty, and we all then have a nightmare situation where you can no longer believe anything politicians say, and we end up with this post-truth world based on dishonesty. And I think it is important to call it out. We call out Boris Johnson for being a liar. We call out Rishi Sunak for lying through his teeth when he said things like the meat tax was scrapped, which never existed. But Keir Starmer clearly...
To be fair, you've just lied, because he never said that. Claire Coutinho did.
What? No, he said
meat tax.
He did. He said they scrapped the meat tax before conference. He said that on that national address he did, that weird national address he did to the nation. Anyway, I just think, look, he did make a series of pledges because he thought the membership were to his left, and he felt he had to be dishonest to win their support. And then as soon as he became leader, he could just renege on it all because the media would mostly ignore it because... much of the media think, well, we don't really like the left, and this was being deceitful to Labour members is good politics. That's what happened.
Right, let's move on to a slightly allied question, text question. Please put your names on text, it's always helpful. Is it fair that Labour's leadership ignores its members? For example, not adopting public ownership of utilities and the introduction of proportional representation into its manifesto, despite delegates voting in favour of those policies at the conference. Well, I think that protester was all in favour of proportional representation, so I suspect that's a no-no for the next 20 years in the Labour Party. This is a subject that comes up at all party conferences from time to time, doesn't it? The power that ordinary members should have over the policy-making process. And of course, Labour conferences of old, it was the sovereign policy-making body of the party. It no longer is. Is that a problem, Christian?
Well, I've always thought it's broadly insane to allow members to vote for policy like this. I wouldn't, I think it's very sensible that the Tories don't give them a platform, and I just think it makes for party conference to be a lot less stressful. I also think...
What's the point of it then? If ordinary members have no input into anything, what's the point of it?
Booze up, really, isn't it? I would just say that it's important. It's a rally, it's a corporate, it's a money-making event, it's an opportunity for members to meet and talk to ministers and MPs. So it serves an important function beyond the policy-making. And I understand that Labour's policy-making process goes through all sorts of hurdles, and ultimately the leadership get their final say over it, really, anyway. I found it very odd that Labour was so adept at keeping certain motions off the official conference voting floor, including Brexit, but then allowed certain things like HS2 to just be sort of waved through at the end of the day, because, clearly the implication is it doesn't matter.
Nick?
Well, I think the Labour movement has different parts to it that have always had competing influences on policy. I mean, I was at the National Policy Forum earlier in the year when I spent a weekend very carefully actually negotiating, whether it was with different representatives from the membership, representatives from the trade unions, representatives from affiliated societies, in which we hammered out compromises on the wording, which we then subsequently published. But I don't think it's the case that for the last 100 years it's been the case that Labour leaders have simply adopted particular resolutions. It's always been that it's a compromise between the personal views and the leadership of the person who was the leader of the party at that time in the shadow cabinet, and other aspects of our movement as well.
Do you not miss the days of composites and stuff like that?
I've been through many hours of compositing over the years, and I can honestly say there are better ways to spend the Sunday evening of conference.
Owen Jones?
Well, I mean, clearly it's not a democratic party anymore. I mean, that's just very, very
Well, was it ever?
Well, I mean, to a degree, wasn't it? I mean, there's shades of it, isn't it? You've always had, admittedly, leaderships trying to, I guess, balance their overall political strategy with internal democracy. But I think this is, John Cruddas, who is a Labour MP, I'd say in the middle of the party, and he's argued that Labour's now in the grip of the most authoritarian right-wing faction in its history, and I think he's got a point. Keir Starmer promised in the leadership election to democratise the party. He said members would have things like control over selections. That hasn't happened. They've stitched them up over and over again. And, he did... What's hilarious about it is Labour conference keeps voting for the things Keir Starmer stood for when he became leader. But if you now stood to be selected as a Labour candidate with the policies he stood for, like public ownership, increasing taxes on the rich, you wouldn't get selected. You'd be disqualified for actually standing on the same policies that he got elected with. I just think, I do think what's interesting is despite the shift in the party, and a lot of people, I think, on the left have gone, but even then, you've still got in conference, most people supporting things like public ownership of energy, but then that's the same with the general public. The polling shows that millions of Conservative voters support that.
I guess.
Yes, but they also know when you offer them motherhood and apple pie that it's not believable, right? That's why if you poll individual Corbyn policies that didn't vote for them, they would vote for them, but you offer them as a whole and they go, well, this is completely unaffordable.
I don't think it's motherhood and apple pie, and I think actually with the energy crisis that people have had...
It was in 2019. It was literally every day there was another little Christmas present coming out.
You're right that the Labour manifesto in 2019 was overpacked in this desperate attempt to stop it being a Brexit election, so they kept throwing policies out in an attempt to stop that happening.
Free broadband for everybody.
It didn't work. Well, I think that was a great policy. I think broadband is an essential part of infrastructure. It's about modernising it so everyone can have access to it because the economy depends on it. But look, in terms of, in 2017 Labour clearly didn't win, I know that, but they did get 40% of the vote arguing for those things because I think they resonated. I do think Keir Starmer, if he'd stood on the policies he championed, which conference keep voting for, I think millions of people do support that.
I think he's been reading Machiavelli. Wasn't it Machiavelli said, say anything to get elected because no one will remember what you've said? But of course he was alive in the days before social media and newspapers and television.
No, Ian, he's been reading Nick Thomas-Symonds' book on Harold Wilson is what he's actually been reading.
Oh, such a shameless plug.
I think it's the second or third this broadcast.
The indignity.
Let's see if we can beat that over.
I like it.
Capitalism is the core of the Labour.
Subtle. If you read The Establishment and How They Get Away with It by Owen Jones, published in 2014.
Well,
you
can have actually. Just by the Express.
You've got a much delayed new book coming out.
Don't, mate.
Have you actually delivered it yet?
I have actually. It's only 5 years late.
Excellent. It's 8:48.
LBC.
Find out more.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
Christian Calgie from the Daily Express, Owen Jones from The Guardian, and Nick Thomas-Symonds from the Ministry Without Portfolio. They are with us answering your questions. Sarah in Bristol says, did what happened at the start of Starmer's speech show that the public just can't be allowed much direct contact with MPs anymore? We obviously can't forget the murder of Sir David Amess at a constituency surgery in October 2021. I'm not sure that's the conclusion I would draw from what happened today, but Nick, you're the only elected representative on the panel. Do you feel sort of unsafe in a lot of the things that you do?
Well, I had to, as most MPs did, change the way that I operated, particularly after the loss of Joe Cox, who I knew very well, but also the loss of Sir David Amess. And we've had to become far more careful than I would otherwise like to be around surgeries. We have to be careful about advertising where we are in advance. Now, most colleagues that I know are taking these sensible precautions. I don't feel unsafe. I am very determined to serve my constituents to the best of my ability and not be intimidated away from doing that. But I don't think there's any doubt, Iain, that we do have to be more careful than we otherwise would have been about our activities in our constituencies.
Owen?
It's a tough balance, isn't it? Because I more than understand the fear and anxiety of MPs. I mean, you mentioned, obviously, Joe Cox and David Amess, and we also, for example, there's the attempted murder of Rosemary Cooper. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, Rosemary
yes.
Cooper by a far-right...
Rosie Cooper, yeah.
Rosemary by a far extremist, and there's been, many death threats and other very serious attempts to intimidate MPs. I do also think that the right to protest, including peaceful direct action, is a time-honoured tradition in this country. It won many of our rights. I mean, I would say, if I was going to be a bit... critical. I mean, it worked out well for Keir Starmer. I think taking off his jacket, he looked less stuffy, bit of glitter, sort of glammed him up. Yeah, I think it was sort of worked out quite well. But I think the issue was, rule number one with the protest is make it clear what you're protesting about. And I was just baffled. I had no idea what was going on. So I thought the message discipline was poor. But I do think that the right to take peaceful direct action to raise issues that people care about is something we've done throughout history. But I understand the balance in terms of MPs and their legitimate fears about security. And I think, obviously, their security entourage, I'm feeling pretty embarrassed right now.
You're quite right too, Christian.
One of the things, this is my first Labour conference inside the secure zone. I've done 5, 6, 7 Tory conferences. I was astonished at how shoddy the security is here compared to Conservative conference.
You don't have to walk through.
You don't have to walk through a full body scanner. You put your bag through an airport scanner if you've got one. If you don't have to go through any sort of checks other than having your pass scanned. I came through this morning with a full bottle of water that could have been anything. And then, obviously, once you're inside, this is the same as Tory conference. You are roaming around unchecked, surrounded by some of the most important people in the country. And, I know that partly that is because they are in government and so they get additional security funding, but I don't think you can make that distinction between parties in this day and age. As we've seen, they're all likely to be attacked, either as a protest or a physical attack, and whether it's a party issue, whether it's a local policing issue, or whether it's a national security issue, I think all parties have to have parity, and you've got to have a lot better protocols next year. I would also say that there is an increasing almost religious zealotry behind some of these protests, and when you get into that mindset that everything is going to be fire and brimstone in a few years unless you kick up a storm at every possible opportunity, you're willing to go a lot further than someone acting rationally, and that is a wider one of my wider concerns about the sort of far left eco protests that we've seen.
There's someone here on a text saying, "Oh, it was all a setup." And you think, well,
so no,
seriously?
People thought it was me. There was all these people on Twitter were convinced that I'd done it.
It's all about you, Owen.
I wasn't. No, but they genuinely did. I had to deny that it was me.
Oh my God!
Really bizarre.
I just don't know why he covered his branded T-shirt up with a jacket, because none of us could read what the protest organisation...
No, that was the thing, and the message, because he said a people's house, I just didn't
It wasn't snappy, was it?
They
No.
wanted citizens' assemblies and proportional representation. I mean, I never thought people who believed in PR would ever do anything like that. Because the PR people have got quite a presence out there, and they handed me a leaflet the other day, and I just said, "Over my dead body." He said, "Oh, well, that's a shame." Anyway, right, let's go to Fred in Birmingham for another question. Given this country's record of not ever managing to build or run anything, can we really be trusted to host a major football tournament? I'm tempted to say, what a stupid question, given that Euro 96 was a massive success, given that the Olympics in 2012 were a massive success, given I'm sure the 1948 Olympics were as well. But it was announced today that Euro 2028 will be held across all 4 nations of the UK and also the Republic of Ireland. Construction of the stadium intended to be used in Belfast has not even begun yet. 6 years? I thought that stadium had been built.
But there's plenty of time anyway.
Maybe it's like one of those rail stations announced by Rishi that's been built and also isn't built.
Well, indeed. Anyway, OK, Christian, you start. What do you reckon?
I mean, it's partly pessimistic, but also it does feel like over the last couple of decades, the brakes have been slowing down Britain's productivity and ability to build things, and it does seem to be getting exponential. But, people were pessimistic about the Olympics, and that was a once-in-a-lifetime brilliant event. So I'm sure we'll pull it off, and obviously we'll be working with the Irish government as well on this project. So, I'm optimistic on this particular issue.
Owen?
I don't have a doubt about it. Obviously, it's great. Woohoo, well done. And, people are rightly excited, so I don't want to kind of stamp on a sandcastle. But this country has kind of stopped working. It does kind of look like it needs to be turned off and turned on again. Our infrastructure is such a mess. Our train system's a mess. And my worry is that we've allowed, after, I would say, particularly austerity, we've rotted out our ability to do major projects. So I would say the challenge that I would call now an inevitable Labour government. I think it's inevitable Labour will win the next election, and the challenge will be to see if they can get the country working to a degree that we can host a major sporting event and make it a success.
All be down to the Minister without portfolio.
Well, Peter Mandelson was the Minister with portfolio with the Millennium Dome.
You are the new Peter Mandelson.
Well, I'll take any compliments that come in my direction.
It wasn't a compliment.
But it certainly wasn't from Owen Jones. But look, I do think there's a sense when you go around the doorsteps, very understandable sense of which public service has improved in the past 13 years, and I don't think there is one. But listen, on Euro 2028, of course, that is a very positive thing, and I think when we had the Olympics in London in 2012, obviously the Euro 2020 final, though it was in 21, was held at Wembley.
Cowering with Nigel Farage when they were trying to invade the stadium.
Is that where you were?
Literally, they were right next to us. I mean, I wasn't there with him, he just happened to be standing next to him.
Well, I mean, I know Nigel Farage is very close to the Conservatives these days, Ian. We even see him at the conferences. But no, I think these do matter. They do inspire people. They inspire young people to get involved, get active. I think that's a really positive thing.
And Wales will be taking part because you don't have to qualify.
Even better.
Are you a football fan, Owen?
Not massively. It's funny actually because Nick's SPAD special advisor is my former housemate. He's just standing by the side. So there he is, waving away.
Any leaks, we know where they're coming from.
I've watched football with him and other friends. He's more of a rugby guy, weren't you, James?
Okay. Right, final question. This is from Sally in Burnley. Now that Holly Willoughby has followed Phil out of this morning's stage door, who from the world of politics would you like to follow, the likes of Ed Balls and Michael Portillo, and make the move to TV to replace them? Christian?
So I've thought long and hard about this, and I don't know if you've heard about the guy, but there's this backbench Tory MP called Matt Hancock, who I hear might like to make a move to television at some point. Certainly not doing anything in the House of Commons. So I'd say, stand down, give it a go, Matt.
Said no one ever. Owen Jones.
Please make it stop. Politics was called showbiz for ugly people for a very good reason. No offence to, a very handsome, dapper shadow cabinet minister sitting next to me. I just think this kind of showbizisation of politics is something to be resisted. And I just think Matt Hancock, he's just this kind of weird synthesis of Alan Partridge and David Brent, which has kind of spiralled out of all control. And I think Matt Hancock was the moment.
I can imagine you doing this morning, actually. You're quite
Why don't we? What about
bright and bouncy.
What about me and you, Ian? We could be a duo.
I'd be up for it, but they would never have two men doing it, would they?
No, that would be, correctly so.
Yeah, because we would never have three men. Oh, Sorry, we have. Nick.
Two great Labour MPs retiring at the next election who I would love to see jointly interviewing someone, Harriet Harman and Margaret Beckett.
Harriet Harman. I'm not sure.
What about the Strictly side of that question?
Well, I thought we were asking about chat show hosts, so I think they'd be great.
Yeah, I have to say I don't. I don't think they'd be very good.
Do you know, it's a really, really fun. Dawn Butler for Labour is a really fun, charismatic politician. But I'd wanted to stay on the Labour benches. So.
OK, well, on that note, we will finish this hour. So we've actually gone over the hour, so apologies to that for everyone. In the next, thank you very much to Owen Jones, Nick Thomas-Symonds and Christian Calgie. Tomorrow on Cross Question, which will be coming from Westminster, we have the school head teacher and former Social Mobility Commission Chair Catherine Birbalsingh, the Director of the Independent Commission on UK-EU Relations, Mike Buckley, the Conservative peer, Lord Moylan, and the one and only Jackie Smith. Can it get better than that? I think she might have a bit of a row with a couple of those, but we'll see. Coming up in the next hour, we're going to take your calls on what's happening in Israel and Gaza. I'm not going to ask any particular question, actually, because I just want to leave it open for you to have your say. I don't particularly want it to get particularly rowdy, because on this issue it can do. People have very, very strong opinions. But where do we go from here, I suppose, is the open question that I'm going to ask. I understand that the Foreign Secretary might be on his